Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you're doing well. It's been a while, but I have decided to come back with another starter pack of albums that should really kind of get you going if you are looking to dive into the genre of synth punk. Yes, all of these records, in my opinion, are very vital to the genre, essential for kind of like understanding its sound and aesthetics and beginnings. For this conversation, I have invited my buddy Giggens, whose YouTube channel you can check out down below. Yeah, between him and I, we come through with a handful of recommendations in this genre, why you guys need to check them out. And yeah, let's just get into the conversation. Ba-bam. Okay, sick. Here we are with Giggens.
Hi.
And we're about to embark on this magical music recommendation conversation. We have our first record that we are going to be talking about in this batch of albums that we hope you guys check out. That is going to be the 1977 album from Suicide, a New York musical project masterminded by Mr. Alan Vega as well as Martin Rev. Quick shout out also to the final Swan Song album from Alan Vega, which I highly recommend, killer record. But you know, that man, artistically speaking, died the way that he started, really kind of like diving into minimal, repetitive, just immersive electronics, very eerie, very simplistic. And, you know, I feel like if your frame of reference for punk music purely is just sort of like, I don't know, the Ramones or pop punk and that sort of thing, you may go into this Suicide album feeling maybe a little underwhelmed or feeling like, what is this? What makes this like a synth punk album? What is synth punk about this? I feel like in order to kind of understand this record within the context of punk music, you have to sort of understand punk as more of kind of like a purposeful degradation of all sort of like, you know, musical norms and an embrace of again, like lots of simplicity, rudimentary musical ideas, and just a rawness. And on all of those fronts, this Suicide album provides. It's not, you know, a super visceral or explosive or blood pumping album or anything like that. It's more of a creepy record in terms of like vibe and energy and overall atmosphere. You have, again, a lot of repetitive, very simple drum machine beats, harsh, very trebly production, and a lot of songs where Alan Vega is sort of like giving these elaborate, almost kind of spoken word type performances that are very unnerving and very strange.
Yes.
You know, there's at least one cut on there that has like almost a bit of an old rock and roll feel, which is a genre and a sound that I feel like he would embrace more in, you know, later solo stuff and even on like the third kind of Suicide album. But you know, this album is more of kind of like an eerie, goosebumps type terror, especially when you dig into tracks which are quite legendary, like Frankie Teardrop, you know, which is just like this really shocking, you know, gory and horrifying story of a song that, you know, involves parts where Alan is just shrieking and freaking out, and, you know, like the volume jump of those shrieks are so intense that like it's like a jump scare in a song. It's very jarring. It's very strange. And you know, with this record coming out in 1977, it's if I didn't already say, it's really considered like the granddaddy of all synth punk albums. You know, obviously aesthetically, lyrically, in terms of overall vibe and energy, this album is so punk to its core, and it's just fully embracing synths, fully embracing electronics. You know, it's about as, I think, direct as you can get in terms of, you know, again, taking electronics, taking the synthesizer technology of the time, of the era, and just applying that to a very primitive, a very noisy, a very chaotic, and, you know, in their own way, very aggressive sort of punk context. It's strange, it's experimental, it's highly influential as well. You know, MIA even sampled a track off of this for her Maya record. You know, it's a highly copied, highly, sampled record, and has really kind of withstood the test of time as well. And in my opinion, hasn't really aged all that much either. Like, it still sounds freaky by today's standards.
It does. Yeah.
It still does sound freaky and eerie and unnerving. And I feel like with in the alternative scene, a lot of homespun, bedroom type production and electronics on the rise, with that being as popular right now as it is in the alternative scene. I feel like a record like this is more relevant than ever. This is going to be my first recommendation for this list. If you were at all to get any kind of grasp on what synth punk is, this is most definitely a must listen. Is there anything you want to add about this album?
No, you nailed it. I mean, this is like, the grandfather of synth punk. They're probably the most well-known synth punk band there is. And their sound, we mentioned being kind of caveman-like or primitive. It sounds slightly retro because it's a little inspired by garage rock of the 60s, but it's also a little futuristic because of the synths. Right. So it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb into any genre. But it's
there's
truly
an
unique.
anachronism about
absolutely.
It, kind of,
But it's captivating because it's so hypnotic, and their use of like almost droney synth atmosphere is creepy. So it sticks with you, and I can see why it's influential, why people would sample it. Many years later, it still sounds very vibrant and interesting all these years later.
A record that's also quite vibrant by today's standards, I would say, and a record that I feel like is pretty key for, I feel like an era of, I guess what you could say is like kind of indie trash synth punk revivalism, is this 1999 Tigre record.
Yeah.
Which has obviously, and I'm sure you'll go into, like punk roots that go even before this album, because Tigre is not just simply a band of new artists that popped onto the scene. It's more of sort of like a kind of like
group.
a super group of Phoenix rising out of the ashes, a reset, you could say, creatively. I will say though, I feel like they are a band that has gone a little underappreciated in recent years, and they are a group that I think people may not necessarily know the background of per se. So, tell us a little bit about, the start, the personnel, and what exactly they were doing on this record that makes it synth punk.
Yeah, it's one of Kathleen Hanna's groups, and she's been, in a whole bunch of bands over the years, but they basically...
Riot Girl Pioneer,
yeah. They basically chose to do something synthy and a little bit more primitive to kind of stick it to dudes who had a snotty atmosphere, like a snooty atmosphere about being snobs about synthesizers and music in general. They really wanted to make something that had a combination of like 60s girl group influences, but mixed with punk. So it was like the Shangri-Las, but like a punk version of that, 90s punk version of that. And lyrically, they were all over the place, between relationships to the decline of like lyrical thought and depth. I feel like when LGBTQ plus rights weren't even like a question back then, they were the proponents for it. They were up there. And you're right, like you said before, the Tigre, like when we were like in high school, that band was massive. Like everybody talked about those records, like everybody had those CDs. And I feel like they're not as popular as they once were, but their influence is very heavy on what's happening now musically, especially with the indie kind of sphere. But that first record, songs like Decepticon, like I said before, is about like the decline of intellectual lyrics in music and ideas becoming more commercialized when they've started more radicalized. Hot Topic is a great song about listing all their influences, many of them being of the gay community. And what they were doing was so important and impressive. I love that first record. It sounds like it's from a different era, but it also has that retro feel at the same time, which might be just a marker of synth punk in general. But what are your memories with that record?
Yeah, I mean, to sort of like add further context to what you're saying, like, this is a point in time where obviously like things like gay marriage were a really huge hot button issue.
Yeah.
And the gay community was catching so much flack, also from like the Democratic Party too, especially like when they lost the election to Bush, and it's like, oh, it's because you guys like pushed this topic and pushed it, and made it so. Yeah, I mean, we hear this same kind of narrative today in terms of like, oh, we lost because you guys made too big of a deal of the thing,
right?
That we want to drag our feet on and not do anything about. So I mean, the social and political context of those lyrics makes sense with that, and it also makes sense that commentary, given that like 1999 is very much like the post-grunge era, butt rock is really kind of like
on its way, man.
starting to take over everything.
Here we go.
Everything that was edgy and interesting and groundbreaking about the wave of rock music that Kathleen rode in on, and grunge and, Hole and that sort of thing. Everything that was subversive about that stuff has really been sort of like pulled out and defanged.
Right.
And,
Right.
so in a way, even in the underground, you sort of like, had this kind of like stagnant adherence to like, these old rock tropes. And Le Tigre was like an electronic forward looking reset with all of that, politically, aesthetically, everything. And, I feel like they, for the time period, were just about one of the best that you could pull on in terms of like, we're embracing electronics, but we're actually making them hit and punch in a way that feels punky and feels aggressive and feels in your face and feels energetic and feels exciting. And, that's what makes this record in this particular, again, I would say it's almost like a synth punk revival era. There was like a bit of a period in the late 90s, early 2000s where you did have some alternative bands embracing more electronics, but it was like a new scene. It was a new era, and it was a new sort of like, obviously world of technology that they had access to, as opposed to like, what you had available to you in the 70s.
Complete difference.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So as a result, like, those records and those bands, like trying their hand at that same kind of mix of influences, are sounding much different and sounding much more explosive too, in some respects.
Different life experiences, times have changed.
Yeah.
Different attitudes, different ethos, ideologies.
So again, I feel like in terms of like, alternative punk influenced music that has an electronic edge to it, Le Tigre is most definitely like a must, to spin and to listen to.
Check that record out.
This next one that I wanted to talk about is this 1981 album from Deutsch, Amerikanische, Freundschaft. This is a German electronic music duo that, like Suicide, I feel like we're about as clear a combination of electronic music and punk as you could possibly get for that time period. This album, going into it, I feel like, you guys should be kind of forewarned, like with a lot of great punk groups out there, there's a lot of satire going on with this album.
Not at face value.
One of the biggest, most key songs off of it is this kind of groovy dance influenced cut that's bringing a lot of club vibes, like 80s club vibes into the fold. And the lyrics are kind of like encouraging the audience to do the Mussolini as if it's like a dance, and then do the communism and do the Hitler and do the Jesus Christ. There's a lot of funny, very irreverent social commentary going on with this record. A lot of driving, punky grooves between the bass lines and drums. The synthesizers are, subtle, but they're very, clearly there much of the time.
Yeah.
And, it's just got a cool combination of, not only this kind of punk energy and ethos, but it really sort of, and this makes sense with it, kind of being like 80s Germany alternative scene, just a lot of like, dance music from the club at that time, a little bit of Kraftwerk influence as well. You can really kind of like, I wouldn't say these guys are sort of like industrial music pioneers per se, but you can hear in the lyrics and in the grooves, like the influence they would have on bands like Rammstein coming down the road and stuff like that. There is like, a grim vibe to what they're doing, but when you actually dig into the words, it actually gets like quite silly. I mean, the band name itself translates to the German American friendship, and the title of the album is "Everything Is Good." So it's like this weirdly assuring sort of thing, where it's, oh yeah, everything's fine, don't worry about it. But then the music itself sounds like dark as hell.
Complete irony. Yeah.
It sounds dark as hell and weird, and is quite queer sugar coated in some aspects as well. So it's a very strange, very funny, very unique, very energetic record that, again, maybe a bit off-putting, like the Suicide album, and isn't like, sometimes punk in the most obvious of ways. But it's still an exciting record. It's still an intriguing record, and one that I feel like, you guys had to hear if you're going to get a grip on some synth punk stuff. Moving on from there next, we have this Units project.
Yes.
Digital stimulation that you wanted to bring to the table. What did you find digging into this album, and why do people need to listen to it?
I'm a huge fan of this record. This one, a lot of people can call it like minimal wave or even like, I guess, no wave, but it really is synth punk to the core. It totally inspired what would come in the 90s. Like if you're a fan of the Rentals, the Weezer side project Rentals, it's got that like melodic but also kind of creepy atmosphere that like Suicide kind of does, but much more poppy, I would say. They were known as doing like art installations. They played at a JCPenney in a window for like 2 days at one point, as you do. They never had too much success. They put out one record and they recorded the second one and never got released in their lifetime as a band. They had a hit single with A Girl Like You a couple years later in the early 80s, but it's a little Devo-esque in its stiffness, but it's got a lot of human emotion because of the drumming. And for the most part, it was a duo, and they had various members come in and out over the years that they were together. But I don't want to say all of it is robotic, but because it has a bit of a human-esque nature to it, but lyrically it's kind of like if humans in the future were looking at humans of the past. I don't feel like it's written by robots. I feel like it's written by humans of a different era. But I would check out tracks like High Pressure Days, Warm Moving Bodies, Go, particularly for their use of synth swells and tension building. The whole project is just built on atmosphere and fun. So it's kind of like I would say like a heavier version of Devo, or more stiff version of Devo, put it that way. But that record is so much fun. It's quirky, interesting lyrics, definitely something that's going to stick in your brain, and you'll come back to. There's a lot to enjoy there.
Sick. All right. This next one is going to be a recommendation for me. I believe this is like the latest or most recent album that is being recommended in the bunch. This is a 2001 record from the Japanese rock outfit Polysics. They're really like a product of the MySpace era.
Completely.
And we're actually quite popular on the platform at the time. I actually remember back in the day, I went to a show, I saw a performance where they absolutely killed it. But the weird thing about the bill is it was like this multi-date mixed bill of artists orchestrated by MySpace or some kind of, there was some MySpace connection to
Remember
it.
those days?
And it was like different artists who were kind of doing well on the platform.
Yeah.
And so, you had like a pop singer and you had, like maybe a rapper or something. And then you had this band and it's like, nobody was there for all three.
Right.
It's like everybody was there for this one individual artist that they liked the most. Yeah. So again, it made no sense whatsoever in terms of like, aesthetic, cohesion, but like, again, Polysics murdered it. And, I'll say in terms of like direct and kind of modern perceptions in terms of like what punk energy is, this album's probably gonna be the easiest to get into and listen to. Sure. The guitars are bold and they're in your face and the performances are wild and the drums are crazy. The band is really animated, really over the top, and writes really snappy, really energetic songs. And part of the reason I feel like Polysics is like an essential listen and band to explore for this genre is that they really tend to wear their influences on their sleeves.
Yeah, sure.
And if you really get into the band, their catalog almost kind of gives you like a breadcrumb trail of all the other things that they like and that they're into. They're so upfront about it. This album here is titled Eno. It's obvious, like, which is no mistake there. They're literally like shouting out, electronic music pioneer and ambient music pioneer, a multi genre phenom Brian Eno. There's also, art affiliated with their music and the jumpsuits that they wear that, obviously are a big callback to Devo. There's like huge Devo shout outs on multiple projects that they've put out. There's also even a Japanese synth punk band named P Model who, came out in the 70s and could have also made this list as well. And, a lot of Polysix's outfits and sort of like, style influences are borrowed directly from them, like having, letters on their clothes and that sort of thing. So, if you're looking to kind of get into the broader synth punk world and scene and, just like to kind of understand more the crossroads where, punk music and electronic music meet. Polysix is like a really interesting group to get into because there's just so many reference points.
Yeah.
So, there's that element of it. The band really kind of allows you to dig into that world if you learn more about their influences and the things that they're kind of like making note of in their work. But on top of that, like the songs they write are just like crazy and over the top and catchy as hell. The lead singer is just like so... he's beyond description. It's like he's got like the blah, 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 it's
energy.
He just has this wild, just untamable energy that and they've come out with records for decades now at this point, and he just like maintains that intensity.
It's insane.
With every single album. It's so animated and it's so crazy. And I love that not only are the synths and electronics there very prominently in their music, but like they program the drums and they program the synths to just have the boldest, zaniest like sounds that you could possibly imagine. And that's like, I guess like maybe the most key descriptor I would use to describe Polysix's music, like a lot of the other groups who we've referenced in this video so far may have kind of like, a grim, edgy energy, maybe something like really vital or urgent to say, whereas Polysix, they're just zany. They're just nuts. They're just over the top. They have the energy of bands like the Evaporators or like Dead Milkmen, and that it's just pure silliness. It's just it's just wacky.
The Looney Tunes cartoon.
Exactly. It's like it's you could really sort of replace a lot of the sounds in their mixes with cartoon sound effects, and you wouldn't tell much of a difference.
In the most lovingly way possible.
Yeah, and I mean that in a very loving way.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's a thrilling, colorful, just crazy series of songs on this record, and really every track list the band has pulled together at this point. But get into their records, get into their songs, and get into the things that they are calling back to in their albums too, because that's also a great opportunity to find out about some other things too.
Yeah.
So. All right. Moving on from there, we're going to give a shout out to this last one it was this Hollywood demo from the 70s from the Screamers. I've never heard of this group before, but you said despite the fact that this, demo kind of got like a very recent, very late reissue treatment that still, despite that kind of like relative obscurity, the band still had a lot of influence in the California music scene.
Massive. They never recorded a full album and they never released anything in their lifetime, but they're one of those bands where you had to go see them live to experience them. But everyone was inspired by them. The Germs, X, Jello Biafra. Anyone who went to see this band understood how their importance was going to change the scene. They were 2 keyboards and a drummer, and this guy, Tomato Duplanty, on lead vocals, who was just a wild madman on stage. And what they... So if you want to incorporate punk into this synth punk thing, vocally, this is probably the most punk band we're going to talk about, because it's got like the Sid Vicious-esque vocals going on. He's screaming, he's loud, he's bratty, he's snotty. But lyrically, they can sing anything about like, someone's fallen in love more with a magazine than them, or a hijacking on an airplane. Like they're all over the place. But I would say equal parts zany and expressive, but also eerie and focused, where when they were just as nuts on their most exciting tracks, but the ones where they scaled it back some, they were really tight. Like some of these songs that they have, like Punish or Be Damned, can just drag on, but you're sucked into this like creepy, sludgy feel. And then they'll go out and do something that's, 84 seconds long and just plow through it. But yeah, humongous influence, no guitars at all, but it sounds like punk. And the look of them, their logo was one of the most punk-looking logos of all time. It's this dude with his hair just blasting off. Like,
yeah, I have it on the.
It's on the record cover. Yeah,
the record cover, yeah.
Yeah, they've been a band I've been really digging into lately, and there's a lot of great videos of them online playing live. So it's kind of like you get to experience a little bit of what it was like to be part of that scene, but highly influential to bands that came down the road and that were recording, putting out records at that time, like the Germs.
Yeah. No, and late 70s for any kind of band doing synth punk is like super cutting edge and
absolutely,
and, pioneering completely. Regardless of whether or not it got formally printed or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's going to be our recommendations for synth punk classics.
Also play Devo.
Yeah. Also play Devo too. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. There you go. All the recommendations listed down below. Giggens' YouTube channel too. And transition, have you given any of these albums a listen? I hope so. We recommended them, didn't we? Go and do that if you haven't. You guys are the best. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or a link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Synth Punk forever.